He laughed when the tabloids called me the scandal that ruined America's sweetheart. I didn't, because I was the scandal. It started in a city where dreams are traded for survival, Los Angeles, where fame has a price, and love isn't always part of the script. I was 24, a screenwriter still delivering coffee to producers who never remembered my name. He was Aiden Blake, Hollywood's golden boy, the man whose smile could sell movies and whose reputation couldn't afford to break. We met on set. It was supposed to be a one-night collaboration. I was the quiet assistant revising his dialogue. He was the actor who ignored everyone until he saw me struggling with a stack of papers under the rain. He took half of them, smiled that camera-ready smile, and said, "You look like you hate this industry." He wasn't wrong. We fell fast. Not in the way movies show you, with violins and moonlight, but in stolen moments, his hand brushing mine during script readings, our laughter echoing in empty sound stages after midnight. Aiden would sneak into my apartment wearing a hoodie and sunglasses like a cliché spy. He said he wanted to protect me. What he meant was protect himself. Because Aiden Blake, America's favorite son, couldn't afford to love another man. Not with his upcoming superhero franchise and a studio breathing down his neck. I told myself I understood. I told myself I could live in the shadows, be the secret he kissed behind closed doors. But every secret rots eventually. The night it all fell apart, we were at an after-party. The press was everywhere, cameras flashing like lightning. Aiden stood next to me, pretending not to know me. Someone, maybe out of spite, maybe out of boredom, leaked a photo. On my balcony, his lips against my neck. Within hours, social media exploded. His PR team moved faster than I ever thought humanly possible. And that's when he said it. On live television. I don't even know him. 3 words. Cold, sharp, and final. I watched from my apartment, the same one where he used to whisper that he'd fight for me someday. The same apartment that still smelled faintly of his cologne. The laughter we shared turned to static in my ears. I smashed the remote against the floor and cried like a fool who believed a man could love him more than his career. I disappeared after that. Deleted everything. Changed my number. Took whatever writing gigs I could find, anything that didn't remind me of him. Then came Noah Reed. He wasn't supposed to be important. Just a new director with messy hair, paint stains on his sleeves, and the kind of sincerity that didn't belong in Hollywood. He found one of my old scripts, ours, really buried in a forgotten folder I'd submitted years ago. "It's raw," he said, reading it in front of me during a small cafe meeting. "It hurts, but it's real. I want to make this into a film." I laughed bitterly. "It's a love story that doesn't end well." He looked at me, those hazel eyes steady. "Then let's give it the ending it deserves." Noah didn't just see me, he understood me. Where Aiden hid me, Noah brought me into the light. He'd ask about my ideas like they mattered. He'd look at me during rehearsals with that quiet pride that said, "You belong here." The first time he reached for my hand, I almost pulled away. My body still remembered what it felt like to be a secret. But Noah didn't rush me. He just smiled softly and said, "You don't have to be afraid of being loved out loud." For the first time in years, I felt seen. The movie, Half of the Truth, became our shared heartbeat. It was about a man forced to deny his lover in public, my story, our pain, reframed through fiction. But Noah's direction gave it something new, hope. He said every broken love deserved a second chance, even if it wasn't with the same person. One night, after months of filming, we stood alone on set, the city lights glowing like distant stars. I told him the truth. About Aiden. About everything. He didn't pity me. He just pulled me close, forehead to forehead, and whispered, "Then let's make sure no one ever has to hide like that again." I didn't realize then that Aiden was watching from afar. He had come to the studio to meet with producers, one of those surprise visits meant to prove he was still America's clean-cut hero. But when he saw the monitor showing my face on screen, the scene where my character cries, confessing love to a man who can't say it back, something in his expression cracked. The crew didn't notice. But I did. Because love, even when it's over, has a way of recognizing itself. A week later, his message came. Simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at the text for hours, heart pounding. Noah saw it. He didn't say anything at first, just walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said quietly, "You don't owe him forgiveness, but maybe you owe yourself closure." So I went. We met at the same rooftop where he'd once promised the world would know about us someday. The irony wasn't lost on me. Aiden looked older. Not in years, but in the way guilt carves lines into your face. He smiled, awkward and broken. "You look good," he said. "So do you?" I lied. He sighed, hands in pockets, the city burning gold behind him. "I messed up." "Yeah," I said. "You did." He laughed short, bitter, helpless. "They told me I'd lose everything if I didn't deny it. My career, my deals, everything. And I believed them. But the truth is, I lost everything anyway. You were everything." I wanted to scream, to tell him it was too late, that love doesn't wait for convenience. But his eyes were wet, and my anger softened into something sadder. Because maybe we both lost something we could never get back. "I'm happy now," I told him. "And you should be too." He nodded slowly, voice breaking. "Is it him? The director?" "Yes." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Then take care of him. And let him take care of you, yeah." For a moment, we stood in silence. Two men who had once shared everything, and now shared nothing but memories. The wind was soft. The world kept spinning. When I turned to leave, Aiden called out, "Hey, can you do one thing for me?" I stopped. "Write us a better ending," he said. I didn't look back, but I smiled. "I already am." The premiere night of Half of the Truth was nothing like I imagined. I thought I'd walk the red carpet quietly, slip through the chaos unnoticed, and disappear once the lights went down. But nothing about that night was quiet. Not the thunder of photographers shouting Noah's name. Not the glow of camera flashes. Not the tension buzzing under my skin as I walked past posters that bore my words, my pain for the world to see. Noah stood beside me, calm and grounded as always. He wasn't wearing a designer tux. Instead, he'd chosen a simple black suit, his curls a little messy, his tie slightly crooked, just enough imperfection to make him real in a place that worshipped illusions. When his hand brushed against mine, I didn't pull away this time. The world could stare, whisper, snap photos. I didn't care. Because for once, I wasn't hiding. He leaned in, voice low enough only I could hear. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah. Just surreal." He smiled, eyes soft. "You deserve surreal." Inside the theater, as the lights dimmed and the film began, I could feel my heartbeat sinking with the soundtrack slow, steady, and trembling with memory. The story unfolded on screen like a confession written in blood and gold. Every word, every frame was a piece of me I'd buried years ago. The audience gasped when the lead character, the one who represented Aiden, said those same 3 words on screen. I don't even know him. It was haunting to hear them again. But this time, the narrative didn't end there. In the film, the lover didn't disappear into the dark. He rebuilt himself. He found strength in honesty, love in someone who didn't ask him to hide. And when the credits rolled, the room stayed silent for a moment, that heavy silence before applause, where emotion lingers in the air like smoke. Then it came. The thunderous clapping, the cheers, the standing ovation. Noah squeezed my hand. "They loved it." I turned to him, tears burning my eyes. "They loved you." He shook his head. "They loved us." Outside, the air was electric. Reporters swarmed, voices overlapping, microphones thrust forward. Questions flew from every direction. Is the story autobiographical? Was it inspired by someone real? Are you and Mr. Reed dating? Noah looked at me before answering, giving me the choice to stay silent or to step forward. For years, I'd let other people decide how much of myself I was allowed to share. Not anymore. "Yes," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the noise. "It's real. Every line of it." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed like gunfire. Someone shouted, "Are you saying you're the person behind the story?" "Yes," I said again. "And I'm proud of it." Noah smiled, that quiet, grounding smile that made everything else fade. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close for the cameras. But this wasn't for publicity. This was a statement, a declaration. And somewhere, in a dark corner of that same theater, I knew Aiden Blake was watching. The reviews came in fast. Half of the Truth became the film everyone was talking about, raw, bold, heartbreakingly honest. Critics called it a love letter to authenticity. Overnight, my inbox filled with interview requests and screenplay offers. People wanted to know the story behind the story, the man behind the pain. But fame felt different this time. It didn't taste like fear or guilt. It was freedom. Noah and I moved in together a few months later. His apartment in Echo Park was messy, filled with books, vinyl records, and plants that somehow thrived even when neither of us remembered to water them. We'd spend nights cooking pasta, dancing barefoot in the kitchen, while music played from a speaker that always seemed to be dying. He'd call me Trouble, I'd call him Sunshine, and we'd laugh until our ribs ached. It wasn't perfect. We fought about deadlines, about stress, about whether cereal counted as dinner, but it was real. And I think that's what made it beautiful. Still, sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd find myself thinking about Aiden. Not out of longing, but memory. The way one thinks about an old scar, no longer painful, but impossible to forget. One evening, as I was writing in our living room, Noah walked in holding his phone. "You might want to see this," he said, his tone unreadable. It was a press clip: Aiden Blake at a charity gala, dressed in black, looking calmer, quieter. The reporter asked about half of the truth. He smiled slightly. "It's a powerful film," he said. "And the writer, he's brave." The reporter pressed. "Was it based on your life?" Aiden looked directly into the camera and said, "No comment." Then he hesitated. "But I will say this. Sometimes, protecting your image means losing yourself. I learned that the hard way." The clip ended there, but something in my chest loosened. Maybe this was his way of apologizing. Maybe it was his closure too. Noah sat beside me, his hand finding mine. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said softly. "For the first time, I really am." Months passed. Half of the Truth was nominated for multiple awards: screenplay, direction, performance. The night of the Golden Globes, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my bow tie with shaking hands. Noah came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You nervous?" I laughed. "Terrified." "Good," he murmured against my neck. "Means you care." When they called my name for Best Screenplay, I froze. For a second, I thought I misheard. Then Noah nudged me, grinning. "Go on, golden boy." The applause blurred around me as I walked up the stage. The lights were blinding. My voice shook as I held the trophy, the medal cold in my hand. "I wrote this story," I began, "because once I was told to hide who I was, to deny someone I loved, just to fit into a world that wasn't ready for us. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't stay buried. It finds its way out in art, in words, in courage." I paused, scanning the crowd. I found Noah's face, eyes shining with pride. And then, a few rows behind him, Aiden. He was clapping, slowly, sincerely. Our eyes met for just a second, and we both smiled. "Thank you," I finished, "for teaching me that love isn't a scandal. It's the most human thing we have." After the ceremony, the three of us met, not planned, not dramatic, just fate being poetic again. Aiden approached with a careful smile. "Congratulations," he said. "You earned it." "Thank you," I replied genuinely. Noah extended a hand. "You were great in your last film," he said politely. Aiden shook it. "You made something beautiful. Both of you did." There was no tension, no bitterness, just understanding. Three men who had been tangled in the same story, finally free from it. Before he left, Aiden looked at me one last time. "I'm glad you found someone who treats you right. I'm glad you're finding peace," I said. He nodded, smiled faintly, and disappeared into the crowd. And that was the last time I saw him. Life settled into something warm and ordinary after that. Noah's next film wasn't about love, it was about hope, about rebuilding. But even then, he'd joke that I was his muse. Sometimes, when we lay together at night, our fingers entwined, he'd whisper, "Do you ever miss him?" And I'd answer truthfully, "No." I just remember him, because missing someone means you still want them back. Remembering means you've already moved on. The following summer, we took a road trip up the coast. Just us, an old convertible, and the open road. We stopped at every beach town, every roadside diner that looked remotely alive. Noah would take pictures of me laughing with my hair in the wind and say, "This is the shot I'll use when they make a movie about us someday." "Who's playing me?" I teased. "Someone not handsome enough," he grinned. We drove until sunset painted the sky in pink and gold. Parked by the ocean, he turned to me, eyes reflecting the horizon. "You know," he said, "for someone who writes tragedies, you ended up in a pretty good love story." I laughed, leaning my head on his shoulder. Maybe I just needed the right co-writer. He kissed my forehead, whispering, "Then promise me we'll never stop writing." "I promise." The waves crashed softly in the distance, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was living someone else's script. This him, us, the messy, beautiful, honest love we built, this was mine. But life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. A year later, half of The Truth was adapted for streaming. It reached millions far beyond what we imagined. People sent messages from all over the world, thanking us for giving them courage, for showing them they weren't alone. One message stood out. It was from Aiden. "Your film helped me come out. Thank you for letting me be part of your truth." I smiled when I read it, not with sadness, but peace. Because in the end, that's what our story was about, not heartbreak, not fame, but the quiet bravery of living honestly. I turned to Noah, who was sketching storyboards on the couch. "You want to hear something funny?" He looked up. "Always." He finally came out. Noah blinked, then smiled gently. "Good for him." "Yeah," I said. "Good for him." I walked over, curled up beside him, and rested my head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around me without looking up from his drawing. "New idea?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "About two men who learn that love doesn't always start where you expect, but it always ends where it's meant to." "Sounds familiar." He grinned. "Everything worth telling is." And in that moment, with the faint sound of rain against the windows, the scent of coffee lingering in the air, and the man I loved tracing futures on paper, I realized something. The truth didn't ruin me. It saved me. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting the world. It's choosing to live fully, loudly, and without apology. Years later, the world had changed, or maybe it was just me. The noise of Hollywood no longer haunted me. The lights that once blinded me now simply looked like what they were. Flickers on a screen, not the measure of my worth. And the love I once thought would destroy me had, in its strange and painful way, become the reason I was standing where I was. It was a quiet Sunday morning in our home on the edge of the Pacific. Noah was in the kitchen, humming a half-forgotten tune, while sunlight spilled across the floorboards like melted honey. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. I stood by the window, watching the ocean roll in slow, silver waves. Somewhere down there, a kid was flying a kite, and his laughter drifted up to where I stood. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let it sink in, the peace, the stillness, the extraordinary ordinary of it all. No cameras, no scripts, no fear, just us. Noah came up behind me, wrapping his arms loosely around my waist. "You're thinking again," he murmured against my shoulder. "I'm always thinking," I said. "Dangerous habit for a writer." I smiled. "Says the man who turns my words into films." He chuckled softly, resting his chin on my shoulder. "I like your thoughts. They make good stories. Even the sad ones? Especially the sad ones. That's where truth hides." We stood there for a long moment, just breathing in sync, the sea whispering in the distance. Then Noah's voice softened. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Yeah." He pulled back slightly, his eyes steady on mine. "How do you feel about writing a new ending?" I frowned, curious. "To what?" "To us." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. Not a grand gesture, not a dramatic speech, just the quiet kind of sincerity that had always been him. He opened it, revealing a simple silver band. My breath caught. Noah. He smiled, that same boyish, nervous smile I'd fallen for. You once said the bravest thing you ever did was tell the truth. So here's mine. I don't want another day, another sunrise, another script without you beside me. You're my truth, Eli. Will you marry me? The world seemed to blur for a heartbeat, the sound of the waves, the glint of sunlight, even the air felt suspended. And then I laughed through the tears, through the ache, through the disbelief that this was my life now. Yes, I whispered. 1,000 times yes. He exhaled a shaky breath, slipping the ring onto my finger, his hands trembling slightly. Then he pulled me into an embrace, soft, real, grounding. Not the cinematic kind, but the kind you build a life on. Our wedding was small, held in a meadow outside Santa Barbara, surrounded by friends, the film crew who'd become family, and the few people who'd seen us through every storm. There were no tabloids, no red carpets, just laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of wind through tall grass. Aiden was there. He'd reached out months before, asking if he could come. The conversation had been awkward at first, years of silence compressed into a few words, but I said yes. Because forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing yourself from it. When he arrived, he hugged me. Not the polished star hug he gave to cameras, but something genuine, almost trembling. You look happy, he said. I am, I replied. He smiled. Good. You deserve that. So did he. And I hoped, wherever his path led, he'd find it too. During the ceremony, Noah and I stood barefoot on the grass, the Pacific glinting in the distance. We wrote our own vows, not promises of perfection, but of presence. I don't vow to never hurt you, I said, voice unsteady. I vow to always choose to come back when I do, to listen, to learn, to love you even when I'm scared. Noah smiled, eyes wet. And I vow to always remind you that you're not hard to love, that you never were, and that every story I tell from now on will be, in some small way, about you. We kissed under the open sky, laughter breaking into the applause. It wasn't the kind of love the world once told us to hide. It was the kind that made the world stop and listen. Years passed. Seasons changed. The world moved on, as it always does. But some moments stay, stitched into the fabric of who you are. One evening, 5 years later, I found myself standing on a film set, not as the nervous assistant I once was, but as a writer whose words now carried weight. Noah was directing again, his voice echoing across the soundstage, patient and sure. The scene being filmed was simple: 2 men meeting again after years apart. One says, "You hurt me." The other answers, "I know, but I'm still here." The line hit me differently that day, because love isn't always about fireworks. Sometimes it's just 2 people choosing again and again not to walk away. When the cameras stopped rolling, Noah walked over, that familiar glint in his eyes. "Still think I overused dialogue?" he teased. I smiled. "Maybe just the right amount." We walked out of the studio together, the sunset painting the sky in amber light. Reporters no longer chased us. People didn't whisper anymore. Maybe the world had grown a little kinder. Or maybe we had simply stopped asking for permission to exist. In the years that followed, our lives filled with quiet victories, books published, films made, awards forgotten in drawers. We built a home that smelled like coffee and sea salt, with a garden Noah swore he could keep alive but never did. And every morning he'd still make me coffee before writing. Every evening, I'd still read him drafts aloud. It was ordinary, and it was perfect. One night, long after the world had fallen asleep, I woke to find him sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. I joined him, wrapping a blanket around us both. He didn't say anything at first, just reached out and took my hand. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked finally. "All the time. Would you change anything?" I thought about it, the heartbreak, the fear, the years of hiding, the pain of denial. Then I shook my head. "No," I said, "because if I did, I might not have ended up here." He smiled faintly, resting his head against mine. "You know, They still call you the man who wrote the truth. And you, they call me the man who filmed it. We laughed quietly. Somewhere in the distance, the waves kept time. Sometimes, when I teach at the university now, a small creative writing program in Santa Monica, students ask me what love really is. I tell them it's not grand gestures or perfect people. It's the small things. A hand that stays when the world walks away. A voice that reminds you who you are when you forget. It's truth, raw, inconvenient, sometimes painful but always real. And when they ask if I believe in happy endings, I always smile. Because yes, I do. But not the kind that fade to black with a kiss. The kind that keeps going, quietly, endlessly, through ordinary days and unexpected years. The last scene I ever wrote for Half of the Truth, to the final chapter we never filmed, ended like this. Two men sit by the ocean. One says, "We made it." The other smiles and replies, "We always would have. We just needed to stop pretending we couldn't." Maybe that's all any of us ever need, to stop pretending we don't deserve to be loved out loud. One summer afternoon, decades later, I stood on the same rooftop where everything had once fallen apart. Los Angeles stretched beneath me, glittering and distant. The skyline had changed, new towers, new dreams, but the air still smelled faintly of rain and neon. Noah's voice floated up behind me. Deja vu. I turned, grinning. You could say that. He walked over, older now, lines at the corners of his eyes, hair touched with gray, but still the same man who'd once told me I didn't have to be afraid of being loved out loud. We stood side by side, the city humming below. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked quietly. "Aiden?" "Yeah." I smiled softly. "Sometimes, but not with sadness anymore. I think he found his peace too." Noah nodded. Then we all did. The sun dipped lower, the sky blushing gold and violet. He took my hand, and we stood there, not as secrets, not as survivors, but as men who had learned that love, once freed, never really ends. The city below buzzed with new stories, new names, new beginnings. And ours, our messy, imperfect, beautiful story, was just one of them. "Ready to go home?" Noah asked. I looked out at the horizon, the same skyline that once witnessed my heartbreak, and smiled. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go home." He squeezed my hand, and we walked away together, the evening wind carrying the faint sound of our laughter, soft, unhurried, and entirely beautifully human. Because after everything, after all the noise and the lies and the years of pretending, I finally understood something simple and absolute. Love doesn't need to be hidden to survive. It just needs to be true. And ours was. Always. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.